Every Thursday morning, the same old construction trucks rolled past the Bennett farm. Workers tossed broken barn boards over the tailgate, cracked fence posts, warped oak beams grey with 50 winters, weathered hardwood nobody wanted, dumped into a growing pile behind Noah Bennett's barn like it was nothing more than trash waiting for a match. Neighbours laughed when they drove by. "Boys building a bonfire," one said. "Free firewood," said another, and nobody argued. But every afternoon, after his chores were done, Noah carried another broken board inside the old barn. He never explained why. He never stopped to answer the jokes. He simply worked, quiet as the fog that settled over the hills each morning and disappeared behind those barn doors like the wood itself was calling him inside. No one in the county knew what he was building. Why would an 18-year-old boy save wood that everyone else was throwing away? What could possibly be worth keeping in a pile of splinters and rust-stained nails? And why, if there was nothing to hide, did Noah always close the barn doors behind him? If you've ever seen something valuable hiding in something everyone else called worthless, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. This one might feel familiar. The Bennett farm sat in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky, where morning fog clung to the hollows until the sun burned it away, and old tobacco barns leaned against the hillsides like tired men resting after a long day. Noah's father, Samuel, had built half of those barns himself, back before his knees gave out from 3 decades of framing work. Samuel believed in his son, but he worried too, worried that Noah was spending his youth chasing something that would never put food on the table. Samuel never said this out loud. He didn't need to. He said it by quietly fixing the barn's leaking roof so Noah's wood wouldn't rot. He said it by leaving an old thermos of coffee by the barn door on cold mornings, then walking away before Noah noticed. Noah carried a small leather notebook everywhere, its cover worn soft as an old glove. Inside he sketched shapes he hadn't built yet. He recorded moisture readings. He wrote down grain patterns like other boys memorized ball scores. His mother had died when he was 12, and the notebook had been hers first, half filled with her own handwriting, recipes, and garden notes that trailed off mid-sentence. Noah simply kept writing where she'd left off. It was on an ordinary Tuesday, cleaning dust from an old barn beam salvaged from a torn-down tobacco shed, that everything changed. Beneath the grey, weathered surface, Noah found tool marks. Hand-hewn, deliberate, made by someone working with an axe, and a broad axe, long before power tools existed. The growth rings inside were tight as thread, packed close together from decades of slow, patient growth. He ran his thumb across the grain and felt something he couldn't yet name. This wasn't broken wood. This was history wearing a disguise. He sat with that beam for almost an hour, saying nothing, the barn silent except for a hawk crying somewhere over the ridge. The next weeks took Noah somewhere he hadn't expected. The County Historical Society tucked in the back room of the old courthouse. He asked the elderly librarian if she had anything on timber framing, on hand-hewn joinery, on how barns used to be built before nails were cheap and lumber was store-bought. She smiled like she'd been waiting years for someone to ask. Noah read everything he could find. He studied timber framing diagrams by lamplight. He learned the difference between mortise and tenon joints and simple lap joints, and why old-growth oak held strength that farmed lumber never could. He drove 40 minutes to sit on the porch of a retired carpenter named Elmer Whitfield, who talked for hours about draw knives and wooden mallets, while Noah filled page after page of his mother's notebook. None of it felt like homework. It felt like listening to people who had passed away decades ago, speaking through the grain of the wood itself. "Wood remembers," Noah wrote one night, underlining it twice. Building the workshop took almost as long as the wood itself needed to season. Noah couldn't afford new tools, so he restored old ones instead. He found a rusted hand plane at a flea market for $2 and spent 3 nights sanding the rust from its blade until it gleamed like new steel He traded a summer of hay hauling for a set of chisels an old-timer no longer used. He carved his own wooden mallet from a chunk of hickory, testing its balance in his palm before he trusted it near a blade. Every tool in that barn had a story before Noah ever touched it. Now it had a second one. His first attempts at furniture were nothing to be proud of. A table he built from reclaimed oak twisted within a week, the legs no longer sitting flush against the floor. A chair leg cracked the first time someone actually sat in it. A cabinet door warped so badly it wouldn't close. Instead of tossing the failures onto the burn pile, Noah wrote down exactly why each one failed. Wrong moisture content, grain running the wrong direction, joints cut without enough give for the wood to breathe. Each failure became a lesson recorded in ink, and slowly, page by page, the lessons started adding up to something. The turning point came on an October afternoon, grey light slanting through the barn's gapped boards, dust drifting through it like slow-falling snow. Noah was cleaning an old oak board salvaged from a torn-down church pew, scrubbing away decades of grime with a soft rag and mineral spirits, when the surface underneath began to reveal itself, tiger stripe grain, deep, warm, rippling like it was alive. He stopped scrubbing. He just stared. "This board waited 100 years, he whispered, and for a long moment, the only sound in the barn was his own breathing. Something shifted in him after that. He wasn't just salvaging wood anymore. He was uncovering things people had forgotten how to see. Over the following months, Noah built farmhouse tables with tops cut from church pews. He carved rocking chairs from fence posts nobody thought would ever hold weight again. He built a cabinet from barn siding that still carried the faint smell of tobacco curing, decades after the last leaf had been hung to dry inside it. Every piece carried something of where it came from, a nail hole left visible on purpose, a saw mark polished instead of sanded away, small proof that the wood had lived a whole life before this one. The neighbours kept laughing, at least for a while. "Nobody's paying good money for junk furniture," one man said at the feed store, loud enough for Noah to hear. Noah didn't argue. He just kept working. It was Elmer Whitfield who changed things first, the same retired carpenter who'd talked with Noah for hours about draw knives. He came out to the barn one afternoon, uninvited, just to see what the boy had actually been building all this time. He didn't say much when he walked in. He ran his weathered hand along the edge of a rocking chair, following the curve of the grain, the way a man reads Braille. He crouched down to study a dovetail joint on a small cabinet. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he straightened up and looked at Noah. "I've worked wood for 50 years, he said. "I've never seen anyone listen to it the way you do." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He shook Noah's hand, nodded once, and drove home. But word travels slow and steady in a place like eastern Kentucky, the same way water finds its way downhill no matter how many rocks sit in the way. One customer told another, then another told a cousin, then a pickup truck Noah didn't recognize pulled into the gravel drive, and a stranger asked quietly if he could look inside the barn. By spring, there were mornings when 3 or 4 trucks sat parked along the fence line, people waiting patiently just to see what Noah had made from wood their own families had once thrown away. The Appalachian Heritage Festival arrived that September, same as it did every year, filling the courthouse square with quilts and canned goods, and fiddle music drifting between the booths. Samuel convinced Noah to bring a few pieces, though Noah hesitated right up until the morning they loaded the truck. People expected simple, reclaimed furniture. Rustic, maybe, charming in a rough sort of way. What they found instead stopped them cold. A dining table with a surface so smooth it looked poured rather than carved, the tiger stripe grain glowing under the festival lights. A rocking chair whose curves seemed to have grown that way naturally. A small hutch built from siding that 3 different families recognized on sight. Because it had come from a barn their own, grandfathers had built with their bare hands. Word moved through the crowd like a current. People stopped talking about quilts and canning. They gathered instead around Noah's small display, running their hands over wood that had once stood as walls and roofs and pews in buildings some of them had helped construct 60 years earlier. An old woman pressed her palm against the hutch and had to step back, eyes wet, whispering that it was made from her family's church, torn down years before after the congregation moved on. Nobody laughed that day. Noah never became wealthy overnight, and the story didn't end with some sudden, unbelievable windfall. What happened instead was slower and, in its own way, more lasting. He started taking on a couple of local teenagers who wanted to learn, kids who might have otherwise spent their afternoons with nothing to do. He taught them the same way Elmer had taught him, patiently, mostly through silence, letting the wood do most of the explaining. Old barns scheduled for demolition started getting a phone call before the bulldozers arrived. Lumber that would have been burned or buried got a second life instead, passed down through Noah's hands into tables and chairs that would sit in living rooms for another 100 years. Traditional joinery, nearly forgotten in that part of the county, found its way back into daily use. Neighbors who once laughed at the junk pile behind Noah's barn started dropping off old boards themselves, almost apologetically asking if he thought there might be something worth saving. There almost always was. The boards had never really been broken, they had only been forgotten, set aside by people too busy or too tired or too used to looking away from anything that didn't look perfect on the surface. Sometimes the strongest things in life aren't waiting to be replaced, they're waiting for someone willing to see what time could never erase. If this story moved you even a little, hit subscribe and join the Farmland Files family. We tell one new story like this every single week, and we'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or state in the comments below. Have you ever seen someone save something everyone else had given up on? An old house, an old truck, a piece of furniture, even a person? Tell us about it. Some of the best stories we've ever told started as a comment right here. See you in the next story.